for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. Oh, quite a bit of news to dive into, and we'll be getting to most of that real quick here. Just give me a quick second as I get all this pulled back up here. With government basically operating the same way that it has, we're searching for the good and what's to come, even when there are bad things to come. And I think one of the things you can say about our society is there's a lot of people out there that they're not willing to give up. And even in tough circumstances, there's a lot of people that weather through that. And we need to reinstill that in the youth, and hopefully we can. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the Ron Paul Liberty Report. And this one's Julian Assange speaks out, and he talks about the war on truth. So I kind of want to dive into this one real quick.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is co-host Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Daniel, we have a very special program today.
Indeed.
We're talking with a friend of ours, and he is in London, and he is in an embassy. His name is Julian Assange, and most people know him, but I would like to first introduce Julian. Julian, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. It's good to be with you again.
Wonderful. Well, your name has been in the news, and I guess that doesn't flatter you too much. You don't need your name in the news, but some Americans were picking on you the other day. They happened to be in government, and one was a CIA guy, Pompeo. He was deciding that they have to find some charges. So far, as I understand, there haven't been any precise charges against you, but they're looking for it, and they've come up with a term in order to segregate you from others who are doing the same thing, that is publishing information. They have to find something special to justify what they're trying to do to you. And now they're calling WikiLeaks a hostile intelligence service. And I want to read one real short quote from Pompeo when he came out with this, because they want to find out how they can file these charges. I think really tells you where they're coming from, because it's a very confused constitutional position. Pompeo said that they can't afford Assange constitutional free speech protection. Then he quotes, Julian Assange has no First Amendment freedoms. He's sitting in an embassy in London. He's not a U.S. citizen, Pompeo said. Well, why don't you comment about what he's doing? And I'm sure you understand the American law and the Constitution a lot better than a couple other people have been talking about your case, because that to us on our program is just totally unconstitutional even to discuss this. They're not even have any comprehension at all about what the First Amendment rights mean.
I think it's a very interesting and worrying statement by Pompeo. It was the first statement, it's the first speech that he's made as the new Trump head of the CIA. And it's about an hour long. The majority of the talk is about us. We're the number one subject. So it doesn't spend its time addressing the United States' real threats, which are terrorism, perhaps a geostrategic threat in relation to China. There's actually not many other serious threats the United States has. Instead, it spends its time not just on WikiLeaks, but WikiLeaks and its ilk, where Pompeo introduces a new concept of a non-state intelligence service. And you think to yourself, hang on, doesn't intelligence service mean state intelligence service? What could be a non-state intelligence service? Well, he says that WikiLeaks is one of these things. And so it's an interesting question. Is what WikiLeaks does, or human rights groups or media organizations, in some ways similar to intelligence services? And the answer is yes and absolutely no. So investigative reporters investigating human rights groups, organizations like The Intercept, ProPublica, and all the serious media that consider national security journalism, we're all involved in developing sources, protecting sources, verifying what sources give to us or what we obtain, then analyzing it, coordinating it internally, and intelligence agencies also do all that. The equivalent of the CIA in Germany is the BND, or Bundesgeheimdienst, which is the literal translation is the Federal News Service. Similarly, in the CIA under Obama about 6 years ago, the CIA introduced a change into how it writes its internal reports to use the same style that journalists use in writing articles, called the inverted pyramid style, where you basically put the conclusion up top and then you justify how you got to the conclusion. So there are similarities between news services and intelligence services, but it ends with what happens to the results of the research. So publishers publish, whereas state intelligence agencies keep the information concealed and use it for the advantage of their organization, for their particular political connections, for militaries, for other intelligence agencies, and so on. So it's for the CIA to say that investigative media organizations and publishers are the same as an intelligence service is as ridiculous as it is to say that the CIA is a media organization. There are similarities in the sourcing in relation to both, but in terms of what the organizations then do with the information is completely different.
Right. Daniel.
And it seems like the use of the term, it's a term of art. I don't think he used it to demonize. I think he used it to categorize, to create a new category out of thin air that would enable the U.S. government to go after WikiLeaks in a much more military sort of way. As the ACLU noted, never has a publisher in the history of the United States been prosecuted for revealing truthful information. So it seems to me that the key is to remove the idea that you're a publisher and call you something different. And I think the battlefield right now is probably in U.S. public opinion. Turn that first against WikiLeaks and then see what happens. Does that seem to make sense?
Yeah, I think Pompeo's speech came about partly as a response to a op-ed I wrote for the Washington Post, speaking, why WikiLeaks does its work and so on. It might have been coming anyway. He was in London the day before, and on the Wednesday, he then returned to the United States. He gave this speech late on a Thursday evening before Easter Friday. So it's actually quite hard to respond to in the media. And from that kind of media analysis point of view was well timed. But the CIA has been deeply humiliated as a result of our ongoing Vault 7 publications. So this is a preemptive move by the CIA to try and discredit our publications and create a new category for WikiLeaks and other national security reporters to strip them of First Amendment protections by defining the organization as something that fits into existing interpretations. So you can surveil and engage in certain actions on hostile intelligence services. That's throughout different pieces of US regulation that you don't need search warrants and so on authorized by a judge if what you're intercepting or surveilling is connected to an organization that is an intelligence service that is influencing someone. So to create this new category of non-state intelligence service, it can then be very easily applied to any media organization. Non-state, of course, means commercial organization or non-profit organization. So I think it's a long-term strategy. It's taking two bites of the apple. One is to create the definition of a non-state, to redefine media as non-state intelligence services. And then on the other hand, to use a perverse jurisdictional argument, which is to say that all foreign reporters have no First Amendment rights. Of course, the First Amendment is not a positive right. It doesn't, generally speaking, give me or in fact anyone else a positive right. It's an obligation to the government to give me a right. It's a limitation on the government that limits its ability to interfere with freedom of expression or of the press in order to create the necessary environment of debate, public debate, which can stop autocracy developing within the United States. Right. So I've seen a lot of misleading assumptions, and they, by even some of our supporters, a lot on the kind of nationalist right, going, well, look, we all like you, but of course the US Constitution doesn't apply to an Australian in London. That completely misreads it. The US Constitution applies to the CIA in Langley, Virginia, and every US government employee, and all the actions that they might take in relation to actions initiated against WikiLeaks. And of course, WikiLeaks has lots of American employees, we're a global organization, et cetera.
Right. You know, the other thing Pompeo was doing, and we've touched on this, is the fact that because you're not an American citizen, you don't have the rights. But, you know, our Constitution isn't written to protect citizens. It's for the persons who are exposed to our courts. And therefore, this accusation that you have no rights, you're not even an American citizen, and therefore you don't qualify, I think a lot of people believe that, and that has to be refuted. But the other charge that they've been throwing out, and I'm sure you've answered to this already, but I think it's important because I don't know whether it's just propaganda on their part or they think they can get somewhere, that you're different than the Washington Post and the New York Times. You're not a publisher because you were a participant in obtaining this information, and they've thrown that out there. But I just want to hear how you answer that charge.
Well, it's completely false. They tried this in the trial of Chelsea Manning in 2013, and it failed. It was not accepted by the military courts. They attempted to use it in order to get an extra charge up against the then Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, and did not succeed. And the evidence that they tried to present was really very pitiful. It was that in 2009, WikiLeaks had a web page, and on that web page, we had collected nominations from police, private investigators, journalists, etc., about what kind of documents that they would be most interested in seeing come to the public. So that was called the WikiLeaks Most Wanted 2009. It wasn't something that we had asserted that we wanted. It was just collecting a list of what other people said that they wanted. And of course, that included all sorts of documents. And the US government argued that there was one of the types of documents that was on that page, Chelsea Manning subsequently leaked to us, and therefore this was some kind of conspiracy. So it's really very indirect and didn't stand up in the case. But of course, the average national security reporter is usually engaged in a much closer relationship with their sources, cultivating them over a long period of time, speaking to them when the source says, I heard that this terrible thing happened. And then the reporter goes, well, that's interesting, but can you prove it? Do you have a document about it? And so Pompeo, and it looks like the DOJ, is trying to redefine that kind of conversation that occurs every day between journalists and their sources as conspiracy to commit espionage and therefore outlaw it.
Mm-hmm. Daniel.
That's chilling. I think, Julian, you mentioned earlier on the strange coincidence of the new assault on WikiLeaks with the Vault 7 releases. Why is the CIA so upset about these Vault 7 releases?
Well, I just go back for a little while. In the democratically aligned press, like the Washington Post and CNN, this assault on us by the CIA and apparently the DOJ is being framed as a Trump administration initiative. But the reality is this was going on under Obama for years and years. This is why I have asylum here. There was a Pentagon war room of more than 120 people publicly admitted, operating 24/7 back in 2010, and then a very large FBI inquiry, spraying out search warrants, trying to install informers, bribing people, flying people to Washington, flying illicitly plane loads of FBI officers to Iceland to interrogate people, etc. It's extremely large. Now, because of a political relationship that the Democrats have with their base, by about 2000 and, well, not long after I had asylum, so by about mid-2012, they perceived that it didn't benefit them politically to talk the case up. But a lot was happening beneath the surface and continued to happen. Now, this new Republican administration, perhaps because of the nature of the Republican base and because of the rhetorical assaults about them being proximate to Russia, have now decided that it benefits them politically to talk up the conflict with WikiLeaks and the DOJ. So that's why it's been raised up so much. The other reason is, yes, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Vault 7 publications. Well, we have published previous documents about the CIA, but only, maybe 10 or 20 documents previously. And it's very rare to see an actual fresh document leaked from the CIA with CIA letterhead. Extremely rare. There's reports about maybe some CIA official says something, or maybe a particular line in a document seen by a journalist says something. But for an actual document is extremely rare. Now, Vault 7 is the largest ever series of publications about the Central Intelligence Agency in its history, hundreds, thousands of times larger than anything that has appeared before, and is on track to be the largest intelligence publication ever.
Yes.
So that is, of course, deeply humiliating to the Central Intelligence Agency and its relationships to others, to other intelligence agencies like MI6, and in its relationship, say, with the National Security Agency and with the FBI. So it needs a way to get away from that humiliation. And of course, the public and tech companies also don't like it very much because we've revealed that the Central Intelligence Agency created an enormous hacker force, produced hundreds of viruses, which it then went around hacking and installing in people, developing methods even to install these into cars, into telephones, and so on, and probably lost control of close to the whole lot of them, thereby and covered it up. So lost control last year of all of this. It's flowing around some intelligence contractors at the very least, and they covered it up, and they didn't tell Apple or Microsoft or other affected members of industry about it. And the public, of course, wasn't told. It'd be quite interesting if it was also concealed from President Obama. Anyway, so they have quite a lot to be concerned about in terms of possible prosecution of CIA officers, defunding of certain parts, general lowering of prestige. And the CIA is a very incompetent organization. I mean, this is the organization, let's look at it. The CIA is the organization that gave us Iraq, Al-Qaeda, the destruction of democracy in Iran, Pinochet, the destruction of Libya, the effective rise of ISIS, and the Syrian civil war. So this is an organization that goes around engaging in actions which are either deeply incompetent or which, even from the perspective of American power, are counter to its purposes.
Julian, your opponents aren't too difficult to understand if you once realize that, from my viewpoint, I don't think they're interested in the truth nor the law. And they are interested in propagandizing a certain position in order to promote some political viewpoint. But, just recently you had an interview with Hannity on Fox, which I found pretty fascinating. I don't know what your opinion is of that, but I thought it was positive. And it's interesting that Fox had this on their program. How did you see this? Did you see this as an advantage to you to at least get your side out in an audience that might be back and forth on the issue?
Yeah, just like publishing op-eds in the Washington Post is now possible because the Washington Post is lined against the Trump administration, and now we have a conflict in relation to Trump's CIA. So when that channel opens up, yes, we do it because we reach an audience that we wouldn't necessarily normally reach. Same with Fox, that certain channels opened up there because of conflicts between the Trump administration and the FBI, Trump administration, the CIA. It looks like CIA essentially won now. So that was important. And people like Hannity and Sarah Palin have been accused of being hypocrites because they made some negative comments about WikiLeaks before. We published Sarah Palin's emails in 2008. So you could understand why she might have been a bit annoyed. But she said I should be hunted down like the Taliban back in 2010. And a few months ago, she apologized. Wow. And is she a hypocrite, or did she learn something and do the right thing? Maybe she's both, I don't know, but I see that as it's something that's positive, regardless of what someone's previous position was. If they have now come to a better position, they should be applauded for coming to that better position.
Oh, well, when they come our way, they're learning something. Dan, you have another question? Exactly. We're gonna finish up here in a few minutes, but Daniel has another question.
Yeah, I'm constantly fascinated by the relationship between WikiLeaks and the mainstream media in the U.S., and you mentioned the Washington Post. And of course, they've accused WikiLeaks of being, its core mission is not transparency, but undermining U.S. national security, yet they gladly publish your documents. But I think the thing that we haven't addressed yet that I think is very important, and I'm sure you're aware of this, it's the ongoing demonization of Russia in the United States. Anyone who questions the national security state is an agent of Putin. Trump is an agent of Putin. We're all agents of Putin if we don't go along with this business. But the Washington Post, especially its editorial page, which, as you know, has a very neoconservative bent under Fred Hyatt, it talks about WikiLeaks has close ties with Russia's intelligence services. This was proven by the intelligence community's report about the DNC hack. Of course, we know about the DNC hack, that the forensic investigation was done by an organization called CrowdStrike. The Washington Post wrote about that quite a bit. But strangely enough, when CrowdStrike was very discredited a couple of weeks ago, the Washington Post neglected to mention that part. So maybe if you could address these charges that WikiLeaks is colluding with Russian intelligence services.
Yeah, it's very mischievous to see that in certain media. That it, of course, is false. But there's no allegation, no official allegation from the US government that there is any evidence of WikiLeaks colluding with Russia, or even that WikiLeaks is colluding with Russia, but they can't find the evidence. That just simply doesn't exist. And in fact, it has been stated multiple times. Barack Obama, in his last speech, said that there's no evidence of WikiLeaks colluding with Russia. James Comey, within the last month, has stated that if the Russians did anything, they didn't do anything directly with WikiLeaks, unlike DC Leaks and Guccifer 2.0. And James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence under Obama, stated just before the transition that the U.S. intelligence community had no insight into how WikiLeaks obtained its publications, when it obtained them, or the sequencing or timing as to how we did our publications. So there you have it, directly from Barack Obama and the head of the FBI and the head of national intelligence, that there's no collusion that they can discern between WikiLeaks and the Russian state. So when you see reportage in the media suggesting otherwise, this is something that is even going beyond what U.S. intelligence is saying. I don't think U.S. intelligence is particularly credible. We all know that they're not particularly credible, and they definitely have an angle that they want to push for their own political and institutional reasons. But they're not saying that WikiLeaks colluded with Russia in any way.
Mm-hmm. Julian, we're going to have to go, but I want to thank you very much for being with us today. But can you give our viewers any information where they can get more information, follow what you're doing? Is there a website, or if they want to help out, do you have a suggestion for what they can do for you?
Yeah, thanks for that. They can follow our Twitter account at WikiLeaks. It's twitter.com/WikiLeaks. And then they can also look at Justice for Assange, that's with the numeral 4, justiceforassange.com, which is about my own personal situation. And my Twitter account is Julian Assange.
Oh, very good. And once again, I want to thank you very much for being with us, and we'll stay in touch, and we wish you well.
Thanks, Dr. Paul. Keep up the fight. Thanks.
Very good. And I want to thank our viewing audience today for joining us today for this very special program. Please come back soon to the Liberty Report.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. Great reports from them. Now, you basically heard it from Assange's mouth. The deal with, WikiLeaks is, they're not an American organization, even though we have our own organizations in multiple spheres working overseas. We allow, people to go over and, fight to go into these countries that are hostile and, save kids from being sold into slavery. But if anybody exposes any crimes or, conspiracies about America that's not a American organization, they will be attacked. And Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are the target. Even though there's some stuff that I kind of wish, didn't get leaked, because it's not necessarily exposing anything that we don't already know, but what it does do is put other people in harm's way that you don't want those things to happen. But the thing is, they're not leaking this information. They're publishing leaked information. There's elements anymore in today's world that create an atmosphere that has almost called for more extreme measures getting information out. And I understand what WikiLeaks tries to do. They don't want to be, called the people that, only put out a portion of something and didn't put out it in full context. And, people have claimed that in the past, so now that, they do dumps. And people criticize that, but then those tend to also be the same people that try to criticize it when, they didn't just completely dump things. It becomes one of those things that WikiLeaks has become the major dumper of the information. And truth and knowledge, that is what helps create freedom. But we also have to have a moral direction and a proper education, which I think is kind of lacking. But hopefully this, we don't have WikiLeaks pander to any government, that they don't pander to authoritarians at all. It doesn't matter if it's Republicans, Democrats, many have claimed that WikiLeaks is softer on, you know, Russia or China or North Korea. And I agree to a point, but there's also a element of WikiLeaks that kind of grew out of, you know, what countries are running around the world the most. What countries are going where they're not invited, that they might not be needed or wanted. And that seems to be a common thread with WikiLeaks. So they tend to go after the countries that are, you know, going around saying we're going to spread freedom by bombing countries and overthrowing, you know, their rulers, whether elected or not. At the same time, they're harming the freedoms of their own citizens. And that's why I think WikiLeaks has really focused a lot on the West. It's not out of, you know, not understanding, you know, that North Korea, you know, there's bad things and a threat there, but it's kind of common knowledge. No one looks at North Korea and goes, that's a great country. We should go live there. Russia and China. I don't follow WikiLeaks all the time. I do see posts occasionally by them. So I don't know what their involvement in Russia and China is. If they take it easy on Russia, maybe because Russia is not so involved everywhere. And when they are, like in Syria, they were invited. You know, some people claim it's because Snowden. I really don't know. And really, the focus that we do need here domestically is the information that relates to our freedoms. What government is doing and what type of wool are they trying to pull over the eyes of Americans? Give me a second here. Oh, sorry. Hopefully that didn't blare in your ear. I don't know. Oh, ad popped up. Trying to pull this article up. It doesn't seem to want to come up. Okay. It's starting to load again. This one out of the Washington Post. Julian Assange, the CIA director, is waging war on truth tellers like WikiLeaks. And this was by Julian Assange. Mike Pompeo, in his first speech as director of the CIA, chose to declare war on free speech rather than on the United States' actual adversaries. He went after WikiLeaks, where I serve as editor, as a non-state hostile intelligence service. In Pompeo's worldview, telling the truth about the administration can be a crime, as Attorney General Jeff Sessions quickly underscored when he described my arrest as a priority. News organizations reported that federal prosecutors are weighing whether to bring charges against members of WikiLeaks, possibly including conspiracy, theft of government property, and violating the Espionage Act. All this speech to stifle speech comes in reaction to the first publication in the start of WikiLeaks' Vault 7 series. Vault 7 has begun publishing evidence of remarkable CIA incompetence and other shortcomings. This includes the agency's creation at a cost of billions of taxpayer dollars of an entire arsenal of cyber versus and hacking programs over which it promptly lost control and then tried to cover up the loss. The publications also revealed the CIA's efforts to infect the public's ubiquitous consumer products and automobiles with computer viruses. When the director of CIA, an unelected public servant, publicly demonizes a publisher such as WikiLeaks as an enemy, it puts all journalists on notice. Or should Pompeo's next talking point, unsupported by fact that WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence service, is a dagger aimed at Americans' constitutional rights to receive honest information about their government. This accusation mirrors attempts throughout history by bureaucrats seeking and failing to criminalize speech that reveals their own failings. President Theodore Roosevelt understood the danger of giving in to those foolish and traitorous persons who endeavor to make it a crime to tell the truth about the administration when the administration is guilty of incompetence or other shortcomings. Such endeavor is itself a crime against the nation, Roosevelt wrote. President Trump and his officials should heed that advice. Words matter, and I assume that Pompeo meant his when he said Julian Assange has no First Amendment freedoms. He's sitting in an embassy in London. He's not a U.S. citizen. As a legal matter, this statement is simply false. It underscores how dangerous it is for an unelected official whose agency's work is rooted in lying and misdirection to be the sole arbiter of the truth and the interpreter of the Constitution. Pompeo demonstrated a remarkable lack of irony when he suggested that WikiLeaks focus instead on the autocratic regimes in the world that actually suppress free speech and dissent, even as he called for a crackdown of such speech. In fact, Pompeo finds himself in the unsavory company of Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, 257,934 documents published by WikiLeaks, Bashar al-Assad of Syria, 2.3 million documents, and the dictatorship in Saudi Arabia, 122,609 documents, to name just a few who have tried and failed to censor WikiLeaks. Pompeo was once a WikiLeaks fan. On July 24th, then partisan politician Pompeo gloatingly tweeted, "Need further proof that the fix was in from President Obama on down. Busted 19,252 emails from DNC leaked by WikiLeaks." Pompeo liked WikiLeaks when he perceived it was publishing material revealing the shortcomings of his political rivals. It was only when our publication touched Pompeo's rice bowl that WikiLeaks became his target. Pompeo subsequently deleted the tweet, but he is learning that in the digital age, the truth is hard to hide. You don't get to love the truth one day and seek its suppression and its incarnation or incarceration of its publisher the next. As a candidate, Trump tweeted, very little pickup by dishonest media of incredible information provided by WikiLeaks. The president mentioned WikiLeaks 164 times during the last month of the election and gushed, I love WikiLeaks. All democratic governments are managed by imperfect human beings, and autocracies are much worse. The benign dictator is a myth. These human beings, democratic and autocratic alike, make mistakes and commit crimes and often serve themselves rather than their countries. They are focus of WikiLeaks publications. The Pompeo doctrine, articulated in his speech, ensnares all serious news and investigative human rights organizations, from ProPublica to Amnesty International to Human Rights Watch. The logic that WikiLeaks or these organizations are somehow intelligence agencies would be an absurd as the suggestion that the CIA is a media outlet. Both journalists and intelligence agencies cultivate and protect sources, collect information, and write reports, but the similarities end there, which he basically said that in that interview. Now, we know there's a war on media that's not, in the back pocket of the government, your mainstream media. So we really shouldn't be too awfully surprised about this. But we'll try to follow that and see what happens if they try to draw up charges on Assange or not. Now, I kind of want to move on to something, that we've seen coming out of the left lately when it comes to the activism. And we've seen this with other groups before, the election and all this. But it's not stopped. There were Tea Party movements and stuff when Obama got elected. But it didn't spill out into violence and stuff, definitely after election was over. You kind of, unless they're, rounding people up and just locking them up, above, what they do normally already, you don't tend to go out and riot. And what they're rioting for, anti-fascism, as they're waving communist flags, is kind of, banging your head up against the wall. You're choosing one authoritarian government over the other, thinking you're going to get a better result. No, they're both authoritarian. That's the problem. You're not going to get better results out of one authoritarian government over the other. We're in a way already there, and what you're protesting against is exactly what you're also calling for. You're just mad that it's not going your way. But it'll never go your way. That's what you don't get about authoritarian governments. Call for more government control of things and you'll get it. But it won't be a benefit to you. Of course, a lot of media personalities that have been in Hollywood and stuff for ages are so disconnected from that because they've been able to profit off of selling it. And they see nothing but good because they're surrounded basically by a facade made for them Plus, they have the money to do what they need to do. I went and visited a bad area, or, a bad country, and going back to your comfortable lifestyle kind of construes how you see things. You promote what you're getting, but you're promoting more of it, saying what you're getting is bad. Oxymoron. Okay, I have an article here. This one from the Blaze. I'm not sure how we were pronouncing. I heard it pronounced multiple ways. Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist, wants combat training and firearms after losing the battle for Berkeley. Last week, supporters of President Donald Trump clashed with members of the leftist group known as Antifa, short for anti-fascist, in Berkeley, California. The meeting of the two groups soon erupted in violence, with Antifa using mace, M80s, and various other weapons to attack Trump supporters. According to Rebel Media's Lauren Southern, Trump supporters were told by police not to bring any weapons, as police would protect them. Upon Antifa's arrival, the police retreated, leaving the Trump supporters to utilize whatever weapons they could get their hands on. Regardless, the Trump supporters routed Antifa after one of their members threw a smoke bomb, not realizing the wind was blowing in Antifa's direction. This prompted Antifa members to begin discussion about how they could better prepare themselves for future skirmishes against Trump supporters. In the subreddit r/anarchism, one Antifa member acknowledged the loss and suggested that members find a way to become better organized and better trained. Another member agreed, saying that too many of their comrades went into battle, no combat training, and suggested they start seminars or something of that sort. The conversation continued with suggestions for better equipment, such as helmets and padding over the typical hoodie and face mask being worn. Another person on this r/anarchism thread suggested they rally behind a leader who can organize and direct actions. The conversation soon turned to weapons, however, and one member in particular suggested bringing firearms. Not getting disarmed is a big part of the problem, yes, but we need more than flags and bats. We need to take notes from the John Brown Gun Club and get firearms and training. I know getting firearms in states and cities we have a presence in is usually a hassle. Because they're your areas with your policies that make it almost hard or impossible to get a gun. Hey, but even handguns would help. I would certainly put a psychological element in while holding Fash back. Who do you think a fascist is more afraid of? People with only flags and bats, or people with flags, bats, and guns? And then there's comments. You can read the comments. First one, yes, we seem to have lost today. The alt-right held their ground. If we want to take action against them, we need to be better organized and better trained. It doesn't help that it's only the far left opposing them. Any Trump supporter can be radicalized far easier than any liberal. I hope we learn from today. Antifa is known for their willingness to use violence and intimidation to silence political and ideological opponents. An Antifa chapter in Clemson University, known as Upstate Antifa, have made an effort to justify the violence and destruction committed against what they loosely base as Nazis and fascists. Recently, Antifa members inadvertently turned on one of their own after his mask was forcibly removed, spraying him with pepper spray and hitting him with a skateboard as they retreated from pro-Trump marchers. Another instance of violence occurred while Trump supporters and Antifa were engaging in trash talk. One of Antifa's members used a bike lock to strike a Trump supporter in the head without warning, causing him to bleed a good deal from his scalp. And that was from theblaze.com. Now, you've seen the rhetoric that came out of the mainstream media when it came to the Tea Partiers. They're racist, they're this or that. We've seen what's come out of, the Trump supporters are violent with the activists interrupting the Trump event. But when they are now showing up to conservative events, they're becoming violent. They basically, and they're claim Nazis, fascists, as they are acting more like the Nazis and fascists. They are the ones that are being authoritarian-like, mob-like, thug-like, gang-like. There's one thing if they're protecting themselves, if they're being threatened, they're minding their own business, they live weird lifestyle or not, whatever, but they're living free, minding their own business, and they're being attacked, I think they should be able to defend themselves. But that's not what's going on. They're attacking free speech. And that should alarm people. That should alarm people a lot. We're going to dive into one. This one's from Stefan Molyneux. This one's actually kind of long, so we'll get into it afterwards. Once I get to it, sorry. And this one's with Jack Posobiec. and Stefan Molyneux interview, and they discuss the Antifa violence. And I found this one to be a pretty interesting interview and discussion. So I might pause it partial way through and discuss a little bit of what they've talked about, and then allow it to play through. But we'll go ahead and dive into this one.
Everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio here with Jack Posobiec. Now, you may have seen Jack Posobiec being on the receiving end of a fairly poorly aimed knuckle sandwich from somebody, an Antifa fellow recently. We'll link to that video below. So we're going to start, though, just getting a little backstory for those of you who don't know Jack. You don't know Jack about Jack. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. Of course, for those who don't know, he is a journalist and the Washington bureau chief for the Rebel Media, twitter.com/Jack, POSOBIEC, Jack Posobiec, and the website is therebel.media. We'll link to those below. Jack, welcome to the show. I wonder how you might go about introducing yourself to this audience.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me on today. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Yeah, I come from by the way of I'm a former political operative in the United States. I worked a lot of campaigns on the Republican side, both at the state level, the local level, for presidentials, to include President Trump's campaign. At one point, I kind of got fed up with all that, so I walked away from it, and I said, forget this, no more politics for me. I'm done with it, because we kept winning and nothing would happen. The Republicans would get in, nothing would change, and so I quit that, joined the U.S. Navy for a few years, and stuck in that, was doing that, got out of it pretty much around when Trump came in, so stayed in the reserves. But when Trump came around, and I said, there might actually be a chance that we can do something here. And I felt compelled enough to want to throw myself into that. So that's what I did for about the second half of 2016. And then my exploits seem to have opened new doors for me back in the media field. So here I find myself working in D.C. for Rebel Media. And it's just been a lot of fun, and just kind of, following the ride wherever it goes at this point.
Yeah. So you went from apolitical to political. Gosh, I wonder what that's like. I wonder if I might someday experience that, say, in my own life. Actually, I already have. So what is, the big story at the moment, of course, and you want to show people your Luke Skywalker hand, as you refer to it.
Yeah, I've got it there. They've got it's really good. The microchips and the crystals all go right in here, and you just power it overnight. It's cool. It's great.
So what's the story behind how you got that injury, and what's happening at the moment?
Sure. So latest update is that I went down to an Antifa event that was going to be happening yesterday in D.C. Now, there's been a lot of these groups in D.C. in the past, but they haven't specifically been Antifa. It's just sort of been this hodgepodge of rebellious youth and sort of holdovers from the 60s and 70s that never really outgrew the hippie phase. And they were causing a lot of violence around the deplorable, around Trump's inauguration, and just random acts of violence throughout the area. So today, or I guess yesterday, was supposed to be their big coming out and saying, we are now Antifa DC. So this was supposed to be their big rebranding effort, and they were holding what they called a block party, believe it or not, at George Washington campus, right down probably just a few blocks away from the White House. And so I thought I'd go down and cover it to say, hey, you guys are the same people that sponsored violence against my event, the Deplorable. You're the people who sponsored violence in Berkeley. You have a history of violence with this organization, Antifa. And so why, right? Why are you committed to this violence? Why won't you disavow this violence? Why do you perpetuate it as a means of getting your political motives, your political agenda across, right? So in the midst of doing that, immediately as I got there, they started screaming Nazi at me. You're a Nazi. You're a fascist. And I'm surprised you guys even know who I am. But apparently they already know that they think that I'm some sort of Nazi or something. I'm trying to talk to them about all this. And then at one point, a gentleman in a bicycle, I'm not much of a gentleman, about the same height as me, tattoos everywhere, the neck, the face, screams, "Where's the Nazi? Where's the Nazi?" They all point at me and say, "There's the Nazi, there's the Nazi." He runs over and attempts to sort of punch, interestingly enough, not me in the face, but he attempts to hit my camera, which I think is kind of telling, because I've got, as I usually do, I've got a camera going, I've got a stream going, I've got some friends across the street or nearby that've got cameras going. So we try to film everything, right? So I thought it was interesting that he tried to strike the camera to stop the evidence, the communication getting out. Then he pulls away, immediately screams, "He hit me." Police come over, arrest him. Anti-Fi comes over because he was screaming racial epithets and he was being disruptive, and this was self-defense.
But this is a white guy, right?
This was, as far as I could tell, he looked pretty white to me. I mean, I never met him before.
So I'm not sure exactly what racial epithets, not that it would justify anything, but what racial epithets would you be screaming at that would even give a cover for some kind of violence? Doesn't make any sense. But I guess it's just the scream of racism is what they've got, right?
Right. So I showed the video for the police officers. They look at it. I posted the same video to my Twitter account where I think the last thing I actually say is they're saying, "Get the Nazi." And I said, I'm not a Nazi. And then he just swings, out of nowhere.
I wanted to pause it there for a second. Now they go off of a playbook, and whether it be, the Occupy movement or, a lot of the movements that you've seen on the left, the Black Lives Matter, there are basically scripts that they go by. When you're involved in this circumstance, this is what you yell, scream, or whatever. It's a common characteristic that you find from the hard left activists. And they use this to try to turn you into the bad guy. So no matter what they're saying, they're coming from a good place.
So no racial epithets, and he'll actually be having a hearing probably in about an hour's time from when we're recording this in D.C. at the U.S. Attorney's Office, because interestingly enough, because D.C. is a federal city, when you commit crimes like that on the streets of D.C., it is a felony. There is no local jurisdiction for that. It goes straight to the federal level.
Right. And one of the things, of course, that is very vivid about this video is because he punches the camera, it literally looks like you're getting punched in the eye when you're watching it. I mean, there is a sort of Cobra Strike vividness to it that is really quite compelling. And I don't think people realize, Jack, that if you are a non-leftist, and this is extreme, I hate this extreme phrase, Le Pen, extreme, far right, massive, but I don't think people really understand that it is risky. It is physically dangerous to attempt social gatherings, to attempt public speaking if you're not on the left, or if there's any way they can credibly attach the sort of hysteria label of Nazi to you, that there is a significant amount of physical danger in public speaking in America at the moment. And it is something that's really, really hard for people to grasp, but I think they really need to focus on it, right? Because there's, the theory of the right of free speech, and then there's the practice of the right of free speech. And, as far as I'm concerned, if you disagree with the speaker, sure, come on out, ask the tough questions, hand out leaflets, you can protest, come and you can't disrupt. That's not fair. That's not reasonable. But I certainly support the right of people to disagree vociferously with those around them. But yeah, the moment you step the line to pulling the acid attack and the deplorable that was being planned, or pulling fire alarms or punching people. And
actually, the guy who planned the acid attack at the deplorable was present there on the street, and you can see him in the video. So something that we hadn't picked up on earlier, but going back and watching the film, I think a few people pointed out. They said, "Hey, wait a minute, who's that guy in the windbreaker off to the side?" That's actually Luke Kuhn, the guy who planned the acid attack on the deplorable, who wanted to put acid basically into the air filtration systems. He had purchased tickets to an event that my mother was at, my father was attending, my brother, my girlfriend, everyone was coming. And he's actually on probation right now, and it looks as though he may have broken his probation by attending this event yesterday. So we actually kind of inadvertently caught that on this tape as well. And they seem to think that this violence, that this idea of violence to them is part and parcel of just moving along their agenda, that there's no difference between, lashing out against somebody rhetorically or with ideas than there is with fists, fisticuffs. And I actually I went, someone alerted me that their Facebook page earlier in the day, I had posted something on Twitter, hey, I'm headed down to George Washington University. I'm going to, if anybody's around, come on down. They actually took that tweet of mine and took my image and my name, posted it to their Facebook hours before the event and said, come down to see the fascist. With my name right on there. So I sent that all over to the police, but it looks like it may be something where this may have been a setup. They were trying to set me up in order to get me, to come out. And then, there's people there that are smart enough to know not to be the one to throw the punch, right? But you set up all the factors so that, someone will throw the punch. And then you can say, oh, it wasn't me, but look, this guy did it. But then they get what they wanted eventually with, somebody getting hurt or somebody getting hit. But, in this case, it didn't work out that well for them. The guy, hit me, but I didn't even drop the phone. They sent a featherweight at Jack Posobiec, and you got to send a heavyweight if you're going to Jack Posobiec.
Well, the thing is, too, I mean, if they can get this general confusing melee going, then that gives free license to the mainstream media to say, mysterious clash erupts at, pro-Trump or whatever it is, right? They never say, right. Trump supporters or free speech supporters attacked by black-clad violent gangs. What they say is, there's this mysterious clash between these two groups. Who knows who started it? But, they're just – and they get to muddy the waters that way, whereas this one is very clear. I mean, you're standing there and the guy comes up and the verbal abuse followed by the punch. There's no real way to spin that as well, we don't know how it started. We don't know what happened. It's like, well, you were out there speaking freely and someone came up and punched you.
Yeah, and so that's something where, I saw how they covered the Berkeley events, and that's something I was trying to follow up with Antifa. But if you look at any of those headlines, it's Trump supporters, alt-righters, neo-Nazis. You never see anything about the leftists that are the ones that – no, hold on a second. The Trump supporters were the ones holding the event. These people came to disrupt the event and cause violence. It wasn't the other way around. This time around, I came to their event. I did. Admittedly, and I didn't bring violence. I didn't bring, bike locks like we saw with the professor out at Berkeley. What I did bring, Stefan, I brought a 12-pack of Pepsi, and I tried to hand Pepsi to them. I said I thought it would be a peace offering because I believe everything that advertising tells me, and advertising tells me that Pepsi is the drink of choice of the resistance, and Kendall Jenner, are the one true Kendall Jenner, the purveyor of truth, told me that if I did that, everything would be okay. And I guess Pepsi lied to me.
Well, yeah, I didn't realize that Princess Leia's last name was Kardashian. That's unusual. It's a bit of Star Wars
Well, it was before
trivia.
she was adopted by that. That's what it was.
Right. Right. Now, you've done a little bit of work into the history of these kinds of groups. I wonder if you could tell people what you've learned.
I have, and so that's something where they've been out since even early 2016. Back in 2016 at the DNC, my brother and I were there covering things, and they were the Bernie supporters, and there was also Antifa, and the Bernie supporters kind of pushed away from Antifa. So we don't want to be associated with those guys. Those guys are crazy. They burn flags. They shop at the ISIS wardrobe department, and we don't want to be associated with them. So looking into it some more, I found that they actually came around in the 1920s. The term anti-fascist, and I lay all this out in a video at Rebel Media, it came from antifascismo, right? And that's an Italian word that came up from the Mussolini regime in Italy, saying that these are the enemies of fascism. What they were, though, was these international sort of combat units that were founded by Leon Trotsky, of all people, as a way of going in and subverting and undermining political systems in countries for communism to then come in on the backs of the violence. So the USSR, the Communist Party at the time, was funding these groups, Antifa, in Germany, in Italy, in other places around Europe, to make it look like they were destabilizing the system. And so to create this idea that the legitimate government, whatever government was in power at the time, should then be overthrown. And
I wanted to pause it there again and say, this is why I say it's so important that we don't let, someone that agrees with us on certain things grow government, make government more powerful, because eventually we can have these people like Antifa get in and push into power communism. And they will do it by the means of, the Trump administration, by using their violence to get the Trump administration to get rid of, constitutional rights. And they'll get people on Trump's side to agree because they feel threatened. So we have to be very careful. Back to this clip.
That this new communist, right? And then the Communist Party would come in and say, oh, well, we'll take care of these guys. You just come and support us, and we'll get rid of these people, and we'll get rid of those idiots that couldn't deal with them. So that's really what they're looking for. And the people that are, involved with Antifa today, they don't even realize this. I went up and asked them some of this stuff, and I said, do you guys realize that you're being played by people like George Soros, by people like Trotsky that have been doing this in the past? They want you to be committing violence. They want you to be the useful idiots so that then they can turn around and say, oh, look, Trump couldn't take care of this, or the government couldn't take care of that. We've got to be able to come in and push more laws, more legislation, or different political parties in this case. In essentially that kind of hoax that's been going on for almost a century now.
Well, and I literally thought at the beginning, before I realized what Antifa was, or anti-fascist, I thought it was anti-FA, anti-First Amendment. I just made that complete mistake, although that could arguably be a more accurate description of their modus operandi.
I think it's about the same thing. And there's that quote that fascism will come in the form of anti-fascism.
Well, of course, Nazis are, I guess we'll go back to the Blues Brothers movie when I was a kid, I hate Illinois Nazis. Nazis, of course, in video games, it's the one group, of course, that is outside any kind of discourse. Now, obviously, National Socialism, no sane person has a particularly positive view of that kind of movement, but this, of course, is they would pick on the least popular people and try and arouse popular sentiment against those least popular people. But, of course, the whole point of having things like the First Amendment, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, the whole point of that is, of course, nobody cares about I like my cat speeches. I mean, the whole point is the challenging speeches, the speeches that really offend your sensibilities. That's exactly what it's for. And this idea that we can just paint an entire group as so demonic that we can just unleash all of the demons of violence against them. That's how these principles get broken. And we have to defend, even if there was a genuine Nazi gathering, as long as they're not using violence, they need to have the right for free speech, because if they lose it, it's a slippery slope to everyone.
Exactly. I mean, it's look, you want to have a platform, give a platform. I tell people that I'm the only journalist out there that's interviewed both Richard Spencer and Rosie O'Donnell, within the span of a week. And I'm all about that. I'm all about saying, look, you have a platform. Tell me where you're coming from. Tell me where your beliefs are. Let's hear what you have to say. If people think you're an idiot, then they're free to think you're an idiot, right? That's part of freedom too. That's part of freedom of speech, and have that out there. But when you have people now coming in and these Antifa groups are putting up memes saying like, we beat them before, and showing a picture of a Nazi being stabbed with a bayonet, and we'll beat them again, and then showing somebody in, a Make America Great Again hat with a Pepe pin being stabbed with a bayonet. Now you're demonizing the other side. Now you're turning them into, it's the same type of propaganda, hilariously enough, that Goebbels would love. This idea of demonizing your opponent, demonizing the other in the argument in a ways that you can commit inhuman acts to them because, well, they are already inhuman in your eyes.
Well, the hypocrisy of the left, which generally focuses, as you're right, on being inclusive and not alienating other people and trying to understand other people's point of view and so on. I mean, I've seen the left try to sympathize with ISIS and so on. Arguably somewhat worse than Trump supporters. and this idea, of course, that you can just, create this demonology and then unleash all the violence you want against that demonology. This is how this kind of violence spreads. And what happens, of course, is it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if they say, well, the right is so evil, they're going to use violence. And then you keep attacking people on the right when they gather together peacefully to discuss ideas, to exchange thoughts, then, of course, as we saw with the Battle of Berkeley, at some point people are going to say, well, I watched Revenge of the Nerds too, so to speak, and I'm tired of being pushed around, and they're going to fight back. And then it's like, aha, you see, we told you they were violent. We were right.
And from a security perspective, you know, one thing that we'd look at in my military training is you talk about de-escalating, defusing situations and defusing stuff like this. But now we're seeing there's videos out there. I haven't published on this yet, but I'm going to soon about these Antifa people, and they're holding, hey, let's have a day at the gun ranges, and let's go do weapons training, and let's go do, you know, push for more and more. And so even if they're not actually planning on mass insurrection, now that video is out there, now that meme is out there, so now people on the other side are going to say, oh, well, if they're bringing guns, what do we need to have? We've got, you know, a guy in a hockey mask with a piece of wood. Maybe he needs to have something further. So the escalation continues and continues. Now there's groups coming out there saying, and at the same point that you made, if you don't have security, if you don't have people that are there to protect you, if you don't have people there as a group, now I know that I've been targeted. I know that other people have been targeted. It's going to continue. So where does the escalation stop? Where does it stop? And you get both sides to say, okay, we disavow violence. And that's why in the video, there were a lot of people that said to me, they said, Jack, you know, you're a Navy guy, you're a big guy. Why didn't you go and just, you know, give him 1-4 and crack him down in the street and get his bike and start hitting him with it? And I said, look, man, the minute I do that, number one, that's illegal because he had already disengaged me at that point. And if I'm chasing him down the street, now that's not self-defense. Now that's me assaulting him in the street. He's disengaged. Number two, now I'm doing what they want me to do because now they can say, oh, look, here's Jack Posobiec beating a guy in the street. And they'll cut off the fact that he hit me and everything. And the media will be able to muddy the waters and say, oh, you know, both of these groups are violent. You know, these are terrible, and we shouldn't listen to them. We shouldn't listen to their opinion because they use violence. And so that's why I'm firmly standing my ground and saying, look, I am not going to use violence. If it comes to the point where I need to defend myself or, you know, someone I'm with, sure, okay, I'll use reasonable force, reasonable means necessary to defend myself. But you're never going to see anyone on our side going and saying, hey, there's an Antifa rally going on, let's go beat them up. You're never going to hear that.
Right. And of course, the irony of these groups portraying Trump supporters or free speech advocates as Nazis suitable for beating is that, of course, as you pointed out, the last time, at least in the West, I guess outside of the 60s, but the last time where this became a huge social problem was in the 20s and the early 30s in Germany, when the National Socialists were fighting with the communists over the future of Germany. And so if you're going to portray yourselves as Nazis, as Nazi-fighting violent people, the people you would most identify with, in my mind at least, are the feral communists in Germany in the 30s. And the moment you start substituting fists for words, as you point out, where on earth does it stop? And there do seem to be significant indications that after the Battle of Berkeley, there's a lot of doubling down from these aggressive groups.
Yeah, and I really would have thought, and this was me, you know, I didn't want to pre-bias any of my interviews at the event, but I would have very much thought from a branding perspective, or just from a moving forward perspective, that as a movement, Antifa would have said, you know what? That Battle of Berkeley got way out of hand. That portrayed us in a way that does not convey our message. That's not the road we want to go down. We would rather be seen as intellectual, and we stand against Trump for, you know, all of this litany of reasons, and here's our manifesto, and fall back on that. But you didn't hear that. You didn't hear anything like that. You didn't hear anything like that they wanted to disavow the violence or move away from the violence. Instead, it was, oh, we just need to be better at the violence, or we need to be able to beat them better. It's almost like their same the same thinking of, well, you know, if we can just get socialism right next time, then it'll work. We just get the right people. I've actually had the Socialist Party international Twitter account has been trolling me pretty much all weekend about all this stuff, the same way that they've been trolling humanity for about the past 200 years. And I don't even understand it, because it's like, guys, this isn't going to work. This has been tried. I don't know how you can't see this. I don't know how
they're like Dory, you know, like Dory in Finding Nemo with the memory problems. You know, well, that one didn't work because it wasn't real socialism. So let's try this again because that didn't work because it's real socialism. So let's try it anyway. We know how that.
We just have to explain it better. We have to be better at the violence. If we can just be a little bit more violent than them, then we'll win.
No,
And
you see, now
that's
capitalism
not a good road to go
capitalism has developed a consumer-friendly version of the internet, and so now socialism plus internet. Every time there's a new technological development, they think that stapling that new technological development onto socialism is going to magically transform it into production, because the internet totally solves the price problem. Right. So I think that there are two, and tell me what you think. I mean, you've been more on the front lines than I have, but there are, to me, two fundamental reasons for this escalation. I mean, outside of the fact that people who use violence are just very bad at debating. I mean, that's a confession. That's that. When I was a kid, like if you get into a big argument with some friend of yours and he bursts into tears and runs away, well, clearly he lost the argument, and that's not and it's the same thing. If someone like escalates violence against you, initiates use of force against you for speaking your mind, it's because they hate what you're saying, but they have no intelligent way to respond. And that is, to me, it's a confession of intellectual impotence, which, when you have to get something done, but you can't do it through words, then of course you're going to do it through violence if you're not willing to give up your goal. But to me, there are sort of two main causes as to why this will escalate outside of the rhetoric of these groups: the media and the police. And the media, of course, by not confronting these groups, by not demanding that they disavow, by not outing some of the stuff that you've outed about, and we'll get to this, these sort of 3 levels of violence and so on, or 3 levels of engagement that occur, because the media is not all over these groups demanding that they disavow the violence and exposing what's going on and so on. The fact that it's falling to Paul to find out who was wielding the bike locks, the fact that it's falling to other people to out all of it was James O'Keefe, who outed some of the deplorable attack plans and so on. So the media is not doing their job. The media is covering up. And of course, the media is left and sympathizes probably with the violence in some ways or another. And the other, of course, is the police. I mean, the fact that the deplorable people got off with community service and no record if they stayed on probation and so on. That, to me, is absolutely appalling. I mean, what they were planning could have resulted in fatalities, as you point out. Anyone who's planning an acid attack involving your mom, you're probably not going to be a huge fan of. So in the absence of the media exposing and criticizing these groups, and in the absence of the justice system applying the law in an even-handed manner to whoever initiates violence, they're going to keep getting away with it. And hopefully that will change under Sessions. Hopefully that will change, to whatever degree the Trump administration can bring these laws to bear on these outlaw groups. But in the absence of the media turning on them, and in the absence of a clear application of law, you kind of, there's a lot of encouragement, if that makes sense.
It's essentially moral hazard, right? So it's a moral hazard in the sense that we got away with it, right? We did all this that we set out to do. We pushed the envelope, right? We being Antifa, we pushed the envelope further and further and further and further, and there hasn't really been any systematic pushback against them. You haven't seen any of these groups being arrested. You haven't seen any of these groups being rounded up. There's like 1 or 2 people that have been outed, that have been taken down, but it hasn't been by the police. Has it been by the FBI? No, it's been by journalists and bloggers at 4chan, guys going on anonymous message boards doing all this work. And it's funny because, we have these, here in the States, we have all this, the NSA and the FBI and all of these massive programs, designed to protect us from these organizations that mean to do us ill will, mean to do us harm. And it seems that not sure what the billions and trillions are going to when it falls to a couple of guys on poll to go through someone's social media, find out what they look like, say, hey, this guy has these kind of shoes and this guy is there. Oh, look at that. That's him,
But remember the Mayak report. Remember when the Tea Partyists were the possible domestic terrorists were the Tea Partyists in the Mayak report, Ron Paul supporters. But when we see the violence, mainstream media has kind of covered up and whitewashed it.
So my question is, what exactly are the FBI doing when it comes to these groups? We hear so much talk about the alt-right and white nationalists, and okay, you can talk about that. That's fine. But I haven't seen them committing violence. I haven't seen them being committed to perpetual acts of violence or escalating acts of violence. This group Antifa, though, you mentioned it, and I break this down a little in my video, is they call for these types, they call them direct action. And it's a tactic that's stated on their blogs and in their rhetoric And they actually, I was surprised to find some of this stuff spoken about so freely. You just go to their websites. Crime Ethnic is one of theirs, where they kind of talk about these tactics. And they have these 3 levels of Antifa, basically. They call it red light, yellow light, and green light. So the reds, they're the people that are willing to go and commit violence. They're willing to commit theft, anarchy, arson, assault in this case, right?
Interesting color choice, Jack. I just wanted to point out that the reds are, anyway, I get it's a traffic light thing, but yeah, okay, go on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's always the reds. Yeah, better dead than red. But then the yellows are the ones are complicit in it, but are not willing to commit the acts themselves. So the way I look at it is the yellows are more sort of running the reds. They're the ones that are sort of directing and orchestrating things, but not actually committing the acts themselves, right? When I did counterterrorism work, this was sort of the way we looked at, terrorist organizations. You'd have like a leader that, he wasn't, strapping on a suicide vest himself. No, you went and recruited people to go do that. So you could go and live, and then continue to do more of your mayhem and destruction, and then get your willing pawns to go and do it for you. Then there's these greens, and the greens are the ones that are just, they're sort of there, they're hangers on, they want to be part of the movement, whatever it is, but they're not really involved in any of the higher stuff or the lower stuff, depending on how you look at it. But the reason that when you see them in their mass demonstrations that they all wear black, and they stated very freely that they call these black blocs, BLOC, not CK. So going right back to Soviet rhetoric, but so that you can't tell who's a red, who's a yellow, who's a green. So the way it's supposed to work in these things is that someone commits an assault, right? Someone comes out and punches a journalist, someone comes out and, sets fire to the local Starbucks, whatever it is. And then you can run into a group of the yellows and the greens, and law enforcement, or if there's any surveillance cameras, whatever it is, can't tell which one of the ones that ran in there in this huge block, because there's not enough going on. However, because these tactics were developed long before internet, long before things like poll, long before things like social media existed, stuff like that could work. Now that we actually have people on our side that are going through and looking into these people, we actually can find. So very infamously, a few days ago, poll was able to identify the individual at Berkeley who was using one of those U-shaped bike locks to go around and assault people, attack people in the streets. They actually outed him as a college professor, of course, in the Bay Area.
Oh, by the way, a college professor of philosophy who focused on ethics.
Yeah, you should have him on the show if he's allowed to have Skype in
because
prison.
Nothing says Socrates like a swinging bike lock.
Exactly, and I think they gypped one of his lectures, and he's talking about anarchist tactics in the streets, and I don't know. I mean, I've listened to Free Domain Radio a few times. I don't hear you talking about anarchist tactics enough. I must have missed that episode.
It's called Reason and Evidence. It's a little less metallic than a lot of these other quote arguments. Bike lock, not an argument. Madness.
So they identified him.
I just want people. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted people to remember this. Like if you've seen Lord of the Rings, there's that all-seeing eye of Sauron. Now that's of course a malevolent entity, but Paul is like the benevolent, all-seeing eye of Sauron that floats above the social landscape. They will find you. They know. They are everywhere. They are legion. Paul, the genius of Paul, and all hail to the people who are doing the work. Paul doing the work that American security agencies just don't want to do. I mean, they're just an incredible bunch of guys, and I'm just all hats off to them. And the work they did on Moldilocks as well is quite substantial. I mean, finding her with the wine bottle and all this kind of stuff, it's remarkable.
And there's been times that you can even go back where they were in contact with a few people in Syria, and they were asking for, they had found a picture of some jihadis walking down this just walking down an alley somewhere in Syria. I have to look up the details exactly where it was. And somebody posted on Twitter and says, "Hey, can you guys find this?" Someone in the Syrian security forces. Poll comes back on that and says, "Yeah, we found it right here. It's right here on Google Earth. This is the exact thing. You can see the minarets right here. It totally lines up. The topography of the area totally matches." And then they say that's great. And I'm like, "Oh, great, thanks for that." About 2 hours later, a Russian drone strike comes in and wipes them all out. So
they're like this magic 8-ball that works. It's like tapping into omniscience. I just think it's the most amazing stuff. Now, I try to get into the minds of other people. You know, this is an old Aristotelian argument or idea that a truly educated man can entertain an opposite thought without succumbing to it. And so I do try and get myself into the minds of people who take this approach to political discourse, which is violence and all this kind of stuff. And do you think that, you know, they view themselves as the Rebel Alliance, you know, everyone else is Darth Vader, and, you know, just as Luke Skywalker could violate the non-aggression principle by sending some photon torpedo up the bowels of the Death Star, that they feel that there's such an extremity, that there's such an evil on the non-left side of things? Do you think that they like to use violence and they're just kind of cruel people or mean people? Or is it sort of this crime and punishment Dostoevskian tightrope walk where, because they genuinely believe that there's so much evil on the non-leftist side of things, that they're heroic in their own mind?
I think it's a little of both, to be honest. I think there are people that genuinely do fall into that idea of thinking that we're samurai, you know, fighting for the rights of the people and against this dystopian, tyrannical government of Trump. And after all, that's what the mainstream media pushed for months and months and months, that that's what Trump was. Trump was the second coming of Hitler, and you've got to stand up against him. Well, and in their minds, if they're actually buying into that, if they're believing that, then to them it's, you know, of course you've got to stand up, you've got to use violence, you've got to use everything you can to stop Hitler, to stop genocide, because he's going to do these things. But at the same time, and those I would say are, you know, using the color scheme, would be more of the reds, right? They're the ones that are the true believers in what Antifa is doing. But I think that the yellows, the ones that are more running the situation, because they're smart enough to not commit violence themselves and actually deploy these people forward ahead of them, that's actually an interesting situation, because then you have to say, well, if you're so committed to this, and if you're so committed to your belief in this, why aren't you right there on the front lines with all these other people committing the violence? Why are you having people do it on your behalf? Do you see yourself as a general, or is it because you know that it's kind of all just, you know, a game, that it's all being facetious?
Oh, no, I know what. Sorry to interrupt. I know what they would say. They would say, listen, you don't send the genius cryptographer who's breaking the enemy codes to the front lines to take bullets, because he's worth more than a whole bunch of foot soldiers. So the intellect is what counts, and it's not everyone is about the fists, and the coordination and the planning and the intellectual and ideological understanding is. I mean, I'm sure that there would be something like that, because
there's
that's
something along that, right? And
yeah.
So then you've got someone that's thinking themselves into delusion, which we may see, you know, that's we call it the Louise Mensch syndrome. Someone who's thought about something and focused on something so incredibly much that they've gazed into their navel so much that they fell in.
And if you look at some of this stuff, and you know, it is important to read this stuff. If you accept the premises of what's being argued for, and you know, there's ways to get there. I'm not sure it's particularly just or rational, but there's, you know, sort of each way to get to the step of violence. You know, the Trump administration is going to be attacking all of these helpless, dependent minorities and women. There are ways to get there in some vaguely Hegelian, justified kind of way. And it really is a different world from something, I think, a little bit more objective, you know, and I think these two worlds, that America is split, and I think this is true. I mean, you could just see this in the recent French election, where all of the mainstream parties, particularly the socialist parties, completely fell away, and outsiders are coming in. We saw this with the Trump victory as well. This sort of split where people don't have different ideas. They literally live in different worlds. They literally live, like, one group lives in a world where Trump was making fun of a disabled guy, and another group lives in a world where, well, Trump makes fun of people, and that's the face and the gestures he makes whenever he makes fun of people, and, you know, he's nothing like that. One lives in a world where, you know, all these sexual assaults and all this attacks and racist things is happening, and the other one lives in a world where it's like, well, a significant proportion of these, if not the outright majority, turn out to be hoaxes and this kind of stuff. They live in a world of rape culture, and people are like, well, you know, rape is very rare and men hate it, and it's been illegal for hundreds of years, and so it's not really rape. Patriarchy versus, well, no, men are, you know, dicked around a lot by the system, family court systems, and like these two different worlds. Not only do they not seem to have anything in common with each other, not even the photos, it seems like, but they're directly oppositional to each other. And that, to me, is the great colliding challenge. We got to find some place where we can meet, and the only place we can meet is in reality. You can't. Two people creating fantasies on their own can't ever get along.
one very interesting moment that came out of my interactions, and I have video of this, I can post it later, is I went up to a girl who was dressed in the black and the masks, and I said, why are you wearing the mask today? You guys aren't doing your marching. Why? She said, well, you guys are going to dox me. You guys are going to dox me, and then you can come after me. And I said, wait a minute, well, hold on a second. Doxing is something that you do to someone's anonymous internet account. You're here on the street in reality with me standing and talking to you face to face. This is reality. This is not the internet. We're not in a separate world right here. This is the actual world where we are together communicating. I'm not on a phone. You're not on a phone. I'm talking to you. I don't need to dox you because you're standing in front of me. But she couldn't wrap her mind around that idea of that there is an objective reality versus sort of the internet virtual reality, if you want to just use that term, because that's almost what it is at this point, that exists that you can sort of plug into after the fact. And the idea that the objective reality almost it's not as important, because what matters is what your Twitter post is, or how many followers or retweets or whatever you get out of it.
Well, she probably would think, well, look, they doxed this professor who was hitting people with bike locks. They found out who he was and so on. It's like, but that's because he was using a weapon. That's sort of a different matter than facing the crowd. And this funny thing, too, is that where I don't know where the law is in various places in the United States, but one place where these groups were gathering, they were simply told to remove their masks, to remove their facial coverings, and they just left. I mean, yeah, it's not that complicated to stop this escalation.
I actually spoke to an officer about that, and I just kind of mentioned to him, I said, hey, does DC have laws against that? What statute? And he said, it's kind of vague. It's you can wear masks in demonstration, but not when you're protesting against someone's personal residence. Then you're not allowed to wear masks. And that totally threw me for a loop, but I've got to look that one up to see how exactly that statute came about.
So where do you think this is going to head, Jack? I mean, you've got some war wounds from these conflicts. We've talked a little bit about some indications that there's going to escalate. And this is the problem for me. Sorry, I'm going to ask you a question, then go on a tiny speech. I apologize for that in advance.
No, not you.
If you've watched this show for a while, you know that's not entirely rare. But this is the problem, is when you take rhetoric to the extremes of like Nazi, genocidal, like when you throw your rhetoric that far out, how do you back down? How do you de-escalate when you've brought Hitler, Nazi, genocide into the conversation? You've basically signaled ahead of time that all compromise will be moral weakness, that any compromise of any kind, any de-escalation is going to be appeasing Hitler. I mean,
and have we not seen that kind of with the mainstream media by whitewashing, the whole Berkeley thing, and really blaming it on the Trump supporters because they won? We've seen a lot of mainstream, more some of the top liberal alternative, what you might call alternative, even though a lot of them have been linked to people that are not so, independent of the system. They claim that, the Trump supporters violently pushed Antifa back, or, they claim that somehow the Trump supporters were to blame for this, or they just name call them. They have to whitewash it because they can't admit, that they were wrong by demonizing Trump the way they did. Now, whether some of their expectations of Trump come true, we'll wait and see. I'm not a Trump supporter, so I come from, in a way, a neutral side. But I'm a free speech supporter. I think both sides have a right to protest, but when it became violent over disagreements, it just you know, if your side has such a good argument, you shouldn't need violence to get it across. And look how quickly Ron Paul rose back in 07, 08. Look how many people from many different spectrums came to support him. And of course, the mainstream media demonized him at the same time, wanting his advice because he was so right on the housing bubble. Same with the Republican Party. They were not going to let him even get to speak on stage unless he endorsed Romney. Kicked out delegates. At the same time had the best farewell video talking about how he's uncorruptible. Finish up this clip here.
Once that rhetoric comes out, it needs to be so strongly opposed, of course, unless you found Hitler, you know, in a vat, his brain, you know, electrically controlling the armies of Venezuela. Like, okay, fine. Then you can say Hitler's brain is still alive in a fish tank in Venezuela. Oh, good. We have a show title. But once you bring that rhetoric to the fore, it seems like, how can you possibly back down once you've got Nazi Hitler genocide going? I mean, there's no possibility. And that to me is the big concern. The rhetoric is paving the way to this continual escalation.
Well, I think there's two tactics that can be used. Number one, of course, is just the basic application of the law from getting, you know, right, yeah. I talk about that. Like,
you enforce the law.
Like we
could
actually
work with immigration too, theoretically.
What actually happened in this case where the assailant was arrested immediately. I did press charges. That he's going to a hearing today. That's happening. So showing them that, yes, there are consequences for these actions. This is not LARPing. This is reality. Actions have consequences, and you will be put in jail, period. Number two, the mimetic warfare, when it comes down to the idea of mockery, when it comes down to these ideas of just using comedy, using humor to just sort of delegitimize them as this group that's out there doing nothing but committing violence, living in their parents' basements. I was talking about, I said kind of facetiously, but we might do it, starting a new charity called Baths for Antifa, because I don't know if you've ever smelled any of these individuals, but believe me, they're not practicing good hygiene. We could do a show on that later. But, this idea that if you're joining with these sides, they're nut jobs. They're complete nut jobs. You can use these tactics against ISIS too. I would implore the Trump administration to use more of this stuff. Saying that instead of getting into this, we escalate, so you escalate, so they escalate, you bring a knife, so I bring a gun kind of thing. You take a step back from that. Down in Auburn, there was a guy who dressed up like a giant carrot, and he called himself the based carrot man. And Antifa was out, and they were attacking, and he said, I don't carrot about your outrage. And he was just dancing around like a carrot. And all of the students there were laughing and cheering the dancing of the carrot man. And Antifa was completely it was a non-issue. They said, we don't pay attention to you. So while we don't meme them into reality, they've been memed into reality now. We can meme them out of reality through humor, through consciousness. And eventually people are going to say that group is stupid. They're not a legitimate group. Nobody should join them. We've got to find another tactic because they're idiots, right? It's like the KKK. There are no active, massive KKK organizations in the United States today, period. There are these tiny little pockets of, like a group of guys that goes into the woods somewhere in the far, far deep South, and CNN wants to act like that 15 guys is this massive, network. No, it doesn't exist. The segregation does not exist in the United States. We've moved so far away from that. We can continue to move far away from that. These groups can be, taken out of power because we can take power away from them by not giving them power in the first place.
Well, one of the things that was pushed back against I always want to remind people of this, that the KKK was the terrorist arm of the Democrat Party. Just remember that. But it was a Superman radio cartoons that had a lot to do with dismantling the KKK. They revealed all their secrets, made them jokes, made them goofy, and so on. Humor as a weapon of warfare is entirely unrelated. Is entirely unremarked upon, and comedy as a weapon of war is incredibly potent. Now, the left understands this, which is why SNL has drifted, well, far from funny for a long time, but closer and closer to the left at all times, and they're very, very powerful. Comedians understand this very well, political comedians. If you can laugh at someone, their power as an enemy is kind of destroyed. I mean, the famous image of the lefty wedgie that has come recently out of this is very, very powerful. And it is really, really tough to be scared of or take seriously people who can be literally, in this case, the butt of jokes. So, yeah, meme warfare is something entirely unappreciated or underappreciated because we have this giant military-industrial complex, and it doesn't take much pay. In fact, they'll do it for free for the genius comedy of the internet to delegitimize an entire movement. And so, yeah, if you get these memes, if you know these memes, share them, create them. It is incredibly powerful. It has a very, very key role to play in saving civilization as a whole.
I believe it or not, your JPEG may be more powerful than 59 cruise missiles.
Right. Well, I want to take your time. Thank you for taking the time today. It was a great pleasure to chat. Just wanted to remind people, twitter.com/Jack, POSOBIEC. Check out Jack's great work at therebel.media. Appreciate your time. I'm sure we'll talk again, and take care of that hand, man.
Thank you. We'll be appreciating it. Working on my lightsaber skills.
Take care.
And you can check out more clips from Stefan Molyneux at Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. Check him out. Subscribe. Now, the problem we might run into here is for both sides to continue to escalate this. And like I was saying, you allow this to get escalated, and it becomes one of those things where constitutional rights start getting, put down by martial law. They decide, hey, you know what, this is out of control. Let's suspend the Constitution and implement martial law. Now, I'm not trying to be a fearmonger, say, hey, martial law is coming. What I'm saying is you're laying groundwork for martial law. And politically, groundwork has been laid for a long time. And I've talked about that in the past, and people are like, oh, you're trying to fearmonger. No, I'm saying they're laying groundwork that makes it easier and easier for them to declare martial law. Now you bring Antifa that now wants combat training and weapons, and you also have, the Trump supporters or the right or alt-right or far right, whoever you want to call them. They called us the libertarians the far right for so long, but now they're calling, oh, these are fascists over here. I don't know who, each individual is and what they believe. I know there's a lot of Trump supporters out there that are not anywhere near fascists. They're not socialists. They're not communists. You let those both elevate to a point of riots and violence everywhere. Definitely when it starts hitting a crap load of universities where the kids are, and there's, innocent, 18-year-olds just left mommy's home, and they're caught in the middle of all this. You don't think that you're not going to have parents all over calling for martial law, definitely in these areas? It's one of those deals, watch what you ask for. These lessons, these were lessons that were taught to a lot of us that are older. The whole genie in the bottle. You know, you ask for or you get 3 wishes, you ask for certain things, you get what you ask for, but not the way you ask for it. And you don't like the result. And that's basically what's happening. So again, you know, watch for this stuff to escalate. And then you start bringing in all the foreign conflict that we'll get into next week that's going on. Well, one way to de-escalate that is, well, send a whole bunch of kids off to war. Could that become a possibility? If we truly get involved to a point that it becomes World War III, that does become a possibility. And again, we'll really get into the foreign conflicts. Usually I cover that, but we'll get into that next week and where we stand by next week. Apparently, North Korea has done another ballistic missile test that went on while we were on air, or at least I got the update about that. But again, we'll get into all that next week. But I would urge the left and the right not to allow themselves to get pulled into this conflict, because if we allow it to escalate, and you know the Trump supporters or the Antifa, the last of the Antifa that might have a little bit of independent thinking going on, look at what you might be laying the groundwork for. Both sides need to be able to have a voice, but we have to put an end to the violence, because neither side will get what they think they want. Beware whenever you attempt to call on government to solve an issue, to control something, to bring order. Because if anybody followed a lot of that Berkeley protest, we watched as law enforcement stood off to the side and allowed the violence to erupt. We really should ask why. A lot harder. Mainstream media should have already asked why. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Stay tuned here to UCY.TV. Great broadcast coming up after this. And don't forget to go to UCY.TV. Scroll down the bottom, click the Amazon button. Shop Amazon through UCY.TV. You get the same great price, the same great shipping rate. And at the same time, UCY gets a little kickback to help cover operating costs on their end. And don't forget to go to antityrannynews.com/metal. Check out Amagi Metals. My choice for gold and silver. Great price and same great deal. And we get a little kickback to help cover our operating costs on our end. And again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. Again, next week, I really want to get into the foreign, conflicts that we're in and where we stand to a possible World War III. Not saying that it will happen, saying what all would have to play out for this to grow into something like that. North Korea plays a integral part in that. So we really have to be aware of what steps we take. Stay tuned.
This is Ozzy Skateboard. You're listening